dog was chained for 7 years, attacked all humans, but when this man approached him, tears. The frozen February wind howled through the abandoned property on Old Mill Road, rattling the broken shutters against weathered walls. In the backyard, a heavy chain clinked rhythmically against frozen ground as Gray, a large gray mixed-breed dog, huddled against the biting cold. 7 years of confinement had taught him to preserve warmth by curling tightly into himself, his matted fur offering little protection against the elements. Through the swirling snow, he caught movement beyond the fence, a small figure trudging along the icy pond's edge. Tommy Wilson, the 8-year-old from 2 houses down, had sneaked out looking for his lost kite. Gray watched silently, his muscles tensing as the boy ventured onto the pond's frozen surface. The crack was barely audible above the wind, but Gray's keen ears caught it. In a heartbeat, the ice gave way, and Tommy's terrified scream pierced the winter night. Without hesitation, Gray lunged forward, his powerful body straining against the chain that had defined his existence. The metal links bit deeply into his scarred neck, but he ignored the pain, barking frantically to alert anyone nearby. No one came. The boy's splashing grew weaker, his small hands scrambling at the breaking ice. Gray's world narrowed to a single purpose. With strength born of desperation, he threw his full weight against the chain again and again. Blood began to seep from beneath his collar, but he didn't stop. Finally, something gave way, not the chain itself, but the ground anchor, weakened by years of strain and winter frost. Partially freed, Gray fought through deep snow to reach the pond's edge. Tommy's head had disappeared beneath the dark water. Without hesitation, Gray plunged into the freezing pond, his chain trailing behind him like an iron shadow. His powerful jaws found Tommy's coat, and with everything he had left, he pulled the boy toward solid ground. Later, when Tommy's parents found their son unconscious but breathing on their back porch, they assumed he had managed to crawl there himself. No one noticed the bloody paw prints in the snow, already being covered by fresh powder. No one saw Gray shivering violently in the darkness, his chain once again secured by its partial anchor, ice forming on his fur. In the morning, the incident would be forgotten by everyone except 2 souls: a traumatized dog who had discovered his own courage, and a young boy who would remember only a blur of gray fur and gentle strength in the frozen night. In the spring of 2016, Gray was born in a reputable shelter in Springfield, Massachusetts, one of 7 puppies in a litter from a rescued German Shepherd mix. From the beginning, he stood out with his distinctive silvery coat and gentle amber eyes. The shelter staff noticed his extraordinary sensitivity. He would comfort other puppies when they were distressed and always approached newcomers with a wagging tail and soft demeanor. The Petersons, James and Sarah, seemed like the perfect match when they visited the shelter that summer. They presented themselves as an affluent couple looking for a family dog, telling the shelter staff about their spacious home and fenced yard. Their story about wanting a companion for their children touched the hearts of the shelter workers. The adoption papers were signed with hope and promises of a loving forever home. The first few weeks were everything a puppy could dream of. Gray had a warm bed, regular meals, and children to play with. He quickly learned basic commands, showing an intelligence that impressed even experienced dog trainers. The Petersons' neighbors often commented on what a well-behaved and gentle puppy he was, especially around the neighborhood kids. But things changed dramatically when James Peterson lost his job at the local bank. The family's financial struggles brought out a darker side to his personality. His drinking increased, and his temper became unpredictable. Gray, once the cherished family pet, became a target for James's frustrations. The first chain appeared when Gray was just 6 months old. "He's getting too big, running around too much," James had declared, despite Sarah's quiet protests. What started as a temporary measure during the day became a permanent situation. The chain grew heavier as Gray grew larger, and his world shrank to a 15-foot radius behind the house. Sarah Peterson, once his strongest advocate, gradually stopped coming outside to pet him or sneak him treats. The children, warned by their father that Gray was becoming dangerous, stayed away. Neighbors who questioned the dog's treatment were met with hostile warnings to mind their own business. The transformation of Gray's life was as gradual as it was heartbreaking. The once playful puppy learned to be wary of sudden movements, to expect pain instead of affection. His meals became irregular, dependent on whether someone remembered or cared to fill his bowl. The shelter's follow-up calls were met with assurances that everything was fine, and home visits were cleverly dodged with excuses. Through scorching summers and freezing winters, Gray remained chained. He developed strategies to survive, learning to curl up tight against the cold, to conserve water during hot spells, to stay still when his neck was raw from the chain's friction. His coat, once glossy and well-groomed, became matted and dull. But beneath the physical neglect, his gentle nature remained intact, buried deep beneath layers of learned defensiveness. Local children would sometimes sneak him bits of food, tossing them over the fence when the Petersons weren't home. Gray never barked at these small acts of kindness, somehow understanding that silence was crucial. He would wait until the children left before carefully eating what they'd brought, always leaving a small portion uneaten, a habit born from never knowing when his next meal would come. Years passed, and Gray's existence became a quiet testimony to resilience. While the neighborhood changed around him, families moving in and out, seasons cycling through, his world remained confined to the length of his chain. The only constants were the old oak tree he was tethered to and the daily rhythm of survival he had mastered. Yet somehow, despite everything, Gray maintained a spark of his original gentle nature. On quiet nights when the house was dark and still, he would watch the stars with the same curious eyes he had as a puppy, as if remembering a different life or perhaps hoping for one yet to come. James and Sarah Peterson's descent into becoming abusive pet owners paralleled their social decline in the community. Once respected members of Springfield's middle class, their reputation began to crumble as James's alcoholism became more apparent. Sarah, once active in local charity events, withdrew from public life, her silence becoming complicit in their darkening story. The first serious incident occurred during a neighborhood barbecue when James, drunk and agitated, claimed Gray had nearly attacked their youngest daughter. Witnesses would later recall that the child had simply tripped while running near Gray's chain area, with the dog showing no aggression whatsoever. But James's loud accusations stuck, and neighbors began warning their children to stay away from the dangerous dog. Sarah Peterson, trapped in her own cycle of denial and fear, supported her husband's false narrative. When questioned by concerned neighbors about Gray's living conditions, she would nervously recite rehearsed lines about how the chain was necessary for everyone's safety, and how Gray had developed aggressive tendencies. These lies became their shield against growing community concern. The Petersons systematically built a false history of incidents. They reported to animal control that Gray had attempted to bite the mail carrier, though the carrier himself would later deny any such incident. They spread rumors about aggressive barking and lunging at passers-by, even though Gray's actual behavior was notably subdued. Each false accusation became another link in the chain binding him to his fate. James Peterson proved particularly clever at manipulating perceptions. He would intentionally agitate Gray before visitors arrived, then point to the dog's defensive reactions as proof of his dangerous nature. When local authorities received complaints about Gray's living conditions, James would temporarily improve things just enough to pass inspection, only to revert to neglect once attention had passed. Their deception extended to medical records. The few times they were forced to take Gray to a vet, they would visit different clinics to avoid establishing a pattern of neglect. Sarah would make excuses about Gray's visible injuries, always claiming they were self-inflicted or the result of his aggressive behavior. The fragments of medical history they created painted a false picture of a problematic animal rather than revealing the truth of their abuse. The Petersons' financial situation continued to deteriorate, but they refused to surrender Gray to a shelter. He had become, in James's twisted logic, a symbol of control he wouldn't relinquish. When neighbors offered to adopt Gray, James would become threatening, warning them about legal consequences if they interfered with his property. The most damaging false accusation came when the Petersons reported that Gray had attacked a child through the fence, an incident that never occurred. This report, though unsubstantiated, became part of the official record, making future rescue efforts more complicated. They used this fabricated incident to justify the increasingly heavy chain and Gray's isolation. Local children who had once secretly fed Gray were sternly warned away by their parents, now convinced by the Petersons' theatrical displays of concern about public safety. The few who doubted the Peterson stories were discouraged from speaking up by James's intimidating behavior and Sarah's tearful performances about their struggles with their dangerous pet. What no one realized was that the Petersons' treatment of Gray was just one manifestation of a deeper pattern of deception. Behind their closed doors, they had created a world where truth was whatever story served their purposes, and Gray's suffering was merely collateral damage in their broader scheme of maintaining appearances and dodging responsibilities. Alex Martinez stood at the window of his rescue center's office, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope. At 42, he had dedicated more than half his life to saving animals that others had given up on. The Second Chance Rehabilitation Center, nestled on 15 acres of peaceful countryside outside Springfield, was more than just a shelter. It was a sanctuary where miracles happened daily. His journey to becoming one of the most respected animal rehabilitators on the East Coast began with his own rescue story. As a troubled teenager, Alex had found purpose and healing through volunteering at a local animal shelter. A particularly aggressive Rottweiler named Duke had changed his life, teaching him that patience and understanding could transform even the most traumatized animals. The center itself was a testament to Alex's vision. Unlike traditional shelters, it was designed to feel like a home. The kennels were spacious rooms with soft lighting and comfortable bedding. Classical music played softly through hidden speakers, and the walls were painted in calming colors. Every detail was carefully planned to help traumatized animals feel safe and begin their healing journey. Alex had assembled a unique team that shared his philosophy. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the center's veterinarian, specialized in treating abuse cases. Emily Chen, their behavioral specialist, had developed innovative techniques for rehabilitating dogs with severe trauma. Together, they had successfully rehabilitated over 300 cases that other facilities had deemed hopeless. The center's reputation had grown through word of mouth among animal control officers and shelter workers across New England. They were known as the last hope for the most challenging cases, the dogs that other facilities couldn't help, the ones that would otherwise face euthanasia. Alex never charged for their services, operating entirely on donations and grants. Linda Parker, the local animal control officer, had become one of their strongest allies. She understood Alex's special gift for connecting with traumatized animals and had witnessed firsthand how his patience could transform even the most aggressive dogs into loving pets. Their partnership had saved countless lives over the years. What set Alex apart was his fundamental belief that every animal deserved a chance, no matter their history. He spent countless hours observing each new arrival, learning their unique language of fear and trust. His methods were unconventional. He would often spend days just sitting near a traumatized dog, reading books aloud to help them associate human presence with calm and safety. The center's walls were lined with before and after photos of their success stories. Each image told a tale of transformation from fearful, aggressive animals to happy, well-adjusted pets. These photos were more than decorations. They were reminders of why they did this challenging work, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with enough time and love. Recently, Alex had started a community outreach program, educating local schools about animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. He believed that prevention through education was just as important as rehabilitation. His presentations often featured some of their success stories, living proof that patience and understanding could overcome years of abuse and neglect. As he prepared for another day at the center, Alex reflected on their latest cases. Each animal brought its own challenges, its own story of survival. But it was the most difficult cases, the ones others had given up on, that drew him most strongly. These were the ones that needed his special touch, his unwavering belief in second chances. The call came at 7:15 a.m. on a crisp October morning. Alex was in his kitchen, going through his morning routine of stirring honey into his tea while reviewing the day's rehabilitation schedules. The familiar ringtone, Linda Parker from Animal Control, made him pause. Linda never called this early unless something was desperately wrong. "Alex, we've got an emergency at 1247 Old Mill Road." Linda's voice was tense, carrying the weight of urgency. "The Petersons have been evicted, but they left their dog behind. It's that case we've been monitoring for years, the chained dog. We've got a 48-hour window before the property gets secured by the bank." Alex's hand tightened around his mug. He knew about the Peterson case. Everyone in local animal welfare circles did. For years, they'd tried to build a case for removal, but the Petersons had been clever at dodging inspections and manipulating the system. Now, finally, there was a chance to help, but the situation was far from simple. "The dog's condition?" Alex asked, already reaching for his rescue kit. "Critical," Linda replied. "He's been out there through 3 nights of rain, no food that we can see. The water bowl is filthy. But Alex..." She hesitated. "That's not the worst part. He's completely unapproachable. My team tried getting close. He's showing extreme aggression. We can't even get within 10 feet to assess his condition properly." As Linda continued briefing him, Alex jotted down crucial details. The dog had been chained for approximately 7 years. Previous attempts by animal control to check on him had been met with hostility from both the dog and the owners. The chain was so embedded in the ground that standard removal equipment wouldn't work without getting dangerously close. The bank's lawyer is pushing for immediate removal, claiming liability issues, Linda explained. If we can't safely remove him today, they're talking about, her voice cracked slightly, more drastic measures. Alex understood the unspoken threat. In liability cases, euthanasia was often considered the practical solution for aggressive dogs. He wouldn't let that happen. Not today. Not to this dog. I'm on my way, Alex said, already mentally preparing his approach. Hold off any decisions until I get there. And Linda, clear the area of onlookers. The fewer people around, the better our chances. The 15-minute drive to Old Mill Road gave Alex time to process the challenges ahead. This wasn't just about removing a dog from a chain, it was about approaching a creature who had known nothing but confinement and neglect for 7 years. The physical chains would be the easiest part to break, the psychological ones would be far more challenging. As he turned onto Old Mill Road, Alex spotted Linda's animal control van parked at a distance from the property. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few early morning dog walkers casting curious glances at the official vehicle. The abandoned house stood like a shadow against the morning sky, its windows dark and accusatory. This would be one of his most challenging cases yet. But as Alex gathered his equipment and began his mental preparation, he felt a familiar sense of purpose. Every rescue was a chance to right a wrong, to bring light into darkness. And somewhere behind that house, chained and afraid, was a dog who deserved that chance more than most. Linda led Alex through her team's earlier failed attempts at rescuing Gray, her voice tight with frustration and concern. The morning had started with their most experienced handler, Mike Thompson, attempting to approach with high-value treats, premium hot dogs and cheese that usually won over even the most skeptical dogs. Gray's response had been immediate and terrifying, lunging to the full extent of his chain, teeth bared, with a deep growl that made even veteran handlers step back. We tried every approach in the manual, Linda explained, showing Alex the detailed report on her clipboard. The second attempt had involved Sarah Jenkins, known for her success with fearful dogs, trying to create a positive association by sitting quietly at a distance with treats. Gray had maintained his aggressive posture for the entire 45 minutes, refusing to relax even slightly in her presence. The third attempt had nearly ended in disaster. While trying to assess the chain's anchor point, James Wilson, their equipment specialist, had ventured slightly too close. Gray's lunge had been so powerful it had caused the chain to emit an ominous creaking sound, making everyone realize just how desperate the situation was. The dog's strength, even after years of confinement, was formidable. "Look at these photos," Linda said, pulling out her phone. The images showed the progression of their attempts, each one revealing something crucial about Gray's behavior. His body language wasn't just aggressive, it spoke of deep-seated trauma. His eyes held a wild fear that went beyond typical territorial behavior. The chain had carved a perfect circle in the dirt, marking 7 years of pacing and confinement. The animal control team had then tried their standard emergency protocols. They'd attempted to create a barrier with mobile fencing panels, hoping to contain Gray while they worked on the chain, but he became even more agitated at the sight of the equipment. The sound of the metal panels being moved had triggered such a violent response that they had to abandon that approach entirely. Even their last resort options had failed. The catch pole, a tool they hated using but sometimes had to in emergency situations, proved impossible to implement. Gray was too smart, too quick, and too strong. His reactions showed years of learning to defend himself against any human approach. Each failed attempt had only increased his agitation and distrust. "We even tried getting a wildlife specialist to assess if we could safely tranquilize him," Linda admitted, her voice heavy with defeat. But the risk was too high. In his agitated state, and with his unknown medical history, it could have been fatal. Plus, we couldn't guarantee an accurate shot with him moving so erratically. The most heartbreaking attempt had come from Karen Mitchell, their senior rescue coordinator. She had tried singing softly while sitting near the property line, a technique that had worked with other traumatized dogs. Gray had watched her silently, showing the first and only break in his aggressive display. For a brief moment they'd seen something shift in his eyes, a flicker of something beyond fear, but it had vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his defensive stance. The neighbors have been filling in some blanks, Linda continued, pointing to the houses nearby. Apparently the Petersons would sometimes forget to feed him for days. The kids from next door would throw food over the fence when they could. But no one's been able to get close to him in years, not even the people who tried to help him. As they stood observing from a safe distance, both Alex and Linda could see the impossible situation they faced. The clock was ticking, the bank's deadline looming, and every standard approach had failed. Gray's chain rattled with each movement, a sound that had become a symphony of his imprisonment. His water bowl lay just within reach, half full of dirty water, a stark reminder of the urgency of their mission. As the morning sun climbed higher, Alex began his careful observation of Gray from a strategic distance. His experienced eyes took in every detail, building a comprehensive picture of what 7 years of neglect had done to this once gentle animal. The dog's physical condition told a story of prolonged suffering that made Alex's heart ache, even as his professional mind cataloged each observation. Gray's coat, which should have been thick and lustrous, hung in matted clumps, revealing patches of irritated skin beneath. Years of exposure to the elements had left his fur a dull, lifeless gray, far from its natural color. The most disturbing sight was the neck area, where the heavy chain had worn away both fur and skin, leaving a ring of calloused flesh that spoke of constant friction and pain. Notice his standing posture, Alex quietly pointed out to Linda. Gray's weight distribution was uneven, favoring his right side. Years of restricted movement had likely led to muscle atrophy and joint problems. His paws were splayed unusually wide, an adaptation from constantly fighting against the chain's pull. Despite these impediments, there was still strength in his frame, the kind that comes from daily survival. The chain itself was a cruel piece of engineering, far heavier than necessary for even a large dog. It disappeared into the ground near an old oak tree, where years of circular movement had carved a deep groove in the earth. Alex noted how Gray had learned to manage its weight, shifting his body in practice movements that minimized the strain on his neck. But it was Gray's eyes that captured Alex's complete attention. Behind the fierce defensive display, he saw something that the others might have missed, an intelligence and awareness that belied the dangerous dog narrative. When Gray thought no one was watching, his guard dropped slightly, revealing exhaustion and what Alex recognized as deep emotional trauma. "He's been monitoring our distances precisely," Alex observed, noting how Gray's reactions changed based on their exact positioning. "See how he tracks movement on his right side more aggressively, probably where most threats came from in the past." Each of Gray's responses was calculated, learned from years of defending his small territory, the only control he had in his confined world. The yard told its own story. Various items lay just outside Gray's reach, evidence of cruel taunting from his past. A water bowl sat precariously at the edge of his chain's radius, forcing him to stretch uncomfortably for every drink. The ground within his reach was completely bare, while thick grass grew mockingly just inches beyond his chain's length. Alex watched Gray's breathing patterns, noting the slight catch in his chest that suggested possible respiratory issues. The dog's ribs were visible, though not severely pronounced, thanks probably to the neighbors who had secretly fed him. His muscles, while wasted in some areas, showed the kind of definition that comes from constantly fighting against restraint. "Look at his eyes when birds fly overhead," Alex murmured to Linda. In those brief moments they caught glimpses of Gray's true nature, a longing in his gaze that followed the free creatures. These moments revealed something crucial. Somewhere inside this defensive, frightened animal was a dog who remembered, or perhaps dreamed of, a different life. Most telling were Gray's micro-expressions, the subtle ear movements, the slight shifts in his facial muscles, the way his tail would inadvertently twitch at certain sounds. These involuntary reactions told Alex that beneath the aggressive display was a dog still capable of normal responses, still able to process information beyond pure fear and defense. "He's not beyond reach," Alex finally declared, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made him famous in rehabilitation circles. "Everything I'm seeing, the way he processes information, how he modulates his responses, even his aggressive displays, it's all learned behavior. sophisticated survival mechanisms. This isn't a dangerous dog, this is a survivor who's never had a chance to be anything else. As the morning progressed, Alex began implementing his unconventional approach to reaching Gray. First, he asked Linda and her team to move their vehicles out of sight, knowing that official presence often added to a traumatized dog's stress. "We need to strip away every layer of pressure," he explained quietly. "Right now, his world needs to be as small and manageable as possible." Alex chose his position carefully, settling cross-legged on the ground at a distance that kept him just outside Gray's reaction threshold. He pulled out a worn paperback book from his rescue kit, The Old Man and the Sea, and began to read aloud in a soft, steady voice. The choice wasn't random. Alex had learned over years that Hemingway's simple, rhythmic prose had a calming effect on traumatized animals. "I'm just going to be here with you," Alex announced to Gray, maintaining a conversational tone. Nothing else happening, no pressure, no expectations. Hour after hour, he remained in the same spot, occasionally shifting position but telegraphing each movement clearly. "See, Gray? I'm just moving my arm now. Nothing scary about that." Unlike previous attempts to reach Gray, Alex didn't try to offer treats or force interaction. Instead, he brought out his own lunch, a simple sandwich, and ate it slowly, deliberately dropping small pieces beside him. "Don't mind me, buddy. Just having my lunch here. You're welcome to your share if you want it, but no rush." Throughout the day, Alex maintained a running commentary of his actions, his voice becoming a constant, predictable presence in Gray's world. He noticed how the dog's ears would twitch at certain words, how his eyes would occasionally flicker with interest despite his maintained defensive posture. These tiny signals told Alex his approach was beginning to work. By early afternoon, Alex observed the first significant change. Gray's constant growling had subsided to occasional rumbles, and his muscles, while still tense, had lost some of their rigid defensive posture. The dog had even sat down briefly, something Linda confirmed she hadn't seen during their earlier attempts. "The key is in the small details," Alex explained softly to Linda when she checked in. "Look at how he's processing my presence. He's learning that humans can be present without being threatening." Every hour brought subtle changes in Gray's behavior, a slight relaxation in his jaw, a momentary lowering of his guard while drinking water, a curious tilt of his head when Alex turned pages in his book. As the sun began to arc toward afternoon, Alex introduced the next phase of his approach. He began humming quietly old folk songs his grandmother had taught him. The melodies were simple, repetitive, and soothing. He noticed how Gray's breathing would sometimes sync with the rhythm of the songs, an unconscious response that showed the dog was beginning to relax despite himself. Alex's patience was unwavering. When Gray showed signs of stress, a sudden tensing, a return to growling, Alex would simply continue reading, his voice maintaining its calm, steady pattern until the dog settled again. He was teaching Gray a new association: human presence could mean peace rather than threat. The breakthrough moment came unexpectedly. A squirrel darted across the yard, and for the first time Gray's attention completely left Alex, tracking the small animal with natural canine interest. In that unguarded moment, Alex saw the dog Gray could have been and might be again. When Gray's attention returned to Alex, there was a subtle but significant change in his expression. The fear was still there, but now tinged with something else: curiosity. "You're doing so well," Alex encouraged, noting how Gray's ears now perked forward occasionally at the sound of his voice. 7 years is a long time to be alone, but that's going to change today. He began mixing personal stories into his monologue, telling Gray about other dogs he'd helped, about the sanctuary where he would soon be safe, about the life that waited beyond the chain. As evening approached, Alex had maintained his position for nearly 8 hours. His back ached from sitting on the hard ground, but he knew they were at a crucial juncture. Gray's defensive displays had decreased significantly, and he had begun showing signs of genuine interest in Alex's presence. More importantly, he had started making choices, choosing to watch rather than growl, to listen rather than bark. The sun was setting when Alex decided to initiate the next critical phase of contact. The fading light cast long shadows across the yard, and the evening air had grown still, creating perfect conditions for what would be the most delicate part of the rescue. He had spent hours observing how Gray's defensive perimeter had gradually shrunk, each small victory bringing them closer to this crucial moment. "I'm going to move a little closer now," Gray Alex announced softly, keeping his voice steady and calm. His movements were deliberately slow as he shifted his position, inching forward on his knees while remaining low to the ground. Gray's ears flattened immediately, but significantly he didn't growl, a marked change from his earlier responses. Each movement forward was calculated, almost glacial in its slowness. Alex would advance 3 inches, then wait 5 minutes, allowing Gray to process each change in distance. The dog's breathing quickened, but he held his ground, his eyes fixed intently on Alex's hands. Years of experience had taught Alex to read these subtle signs. Gray wasn't just tolerating his approach, he was choosing to allow it. "You're so brave," Alex murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "See? Nothing bad happens when we get closer." He was now close enough to see the details of Gray's wounds, the scarred tissue around his neck, the patches of missing fur, the slight tremor in his muscles. Despite these visible signs of trauma, there was something else in Gray's demeanor now, a glimmer of hope. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A distant car backfired, making Gray flinch. But instead of retreating or becoming aggressive, he took a hesitant step toward Alex, as if seeking reassurance. It was a moment that defied 7 years of learned behavior, a choice to move toward rather than away from human contact. Alex remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Gray was now close enough that Alex could feel his warm breath. The dog's nose twitched, taking in Alex's scent. Years of rehabilitation experience hadn't prepared Alex for the profound emotion of this moment, watching as Gray battled between his instinct to flee and his desperate need for connection. "That's it, buddy," Alex whispered, slowly raising his hand, palm up, letting it hover in the space between them. "You make the choice. Everything at your pace." The seconds stretched into minutes as Gray studied the offered hand, his body trembling with the internal conflict of trust versus fear. Then it happened. With aching slowness, Gray lowered his head and touched his nose to Alex's fingertips. The contact lasted only a fraction of a second, but it represented a seismic shift in their relationship. Gray immediately backed away, but there was no aggression in his retreat, only the natural caution of a dog learning to trust again. Alex remained motionless, his hand still extended, tears streaming silently down his face. This simple touch was more than just physical contact. It was Gray's first voluntary connection with a human in 7 years. It was a choice to trust, made despite every painful lesson his life had taught him about human contact. Over the next hour, this dance of approach and retreat continued. Each time, Gray's touches became slightly longer, slightly more confident. His body language began to soften, his tail, previously tucked tight against his body, relaxed slightly. His ears, no longer pinned back in fear, moved freely, tracking Alex's gentle words. The final breakthrough of the evening came as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in deep purples and oranges. Gray, exhausted from the emotional journey of the day, slowly sank to the ground beside Alex, maintaining a small but significant gap. His eyes, while still watchful, had lost their wild fear. Instead, they held a questioning look, as if asking if this new reality could be trusted. Alex began softly narrating stories about the sanctuary, about other dogs who had found healing there, about the soft beds and gentle hands that awaited. Gray's eyes grew heavy as he listened, yet he fought sleep, still not fully ready to let his guard down. But when Alex carefully extended his hand again, Gray didn't hesitate to press his nose against it, holding the contact for several seconds. Linda, who had been watching from a distance, wiped tears from her eyes. In her 20 years of animal control work, she had never seen anything quite like this transformation. The same dog who had been lunging and growling that morning was now choosing to rest near a human, accepting gentle touch, showing the first signs of trust. The moment to remove Gray's chain arrived as twilight deepened into dusk. Alex had waited until this precise time, knowing the falling darkness would help calm Gray's heightened senses. The heavy bolt cutters lay beside him, carefully positioned so Gray could see them clearly. No surprises, no sudden movements. "I'm going to show you something now, buddy," Alex spoke softly, picking up the bolt cutters with deliberate slowness. Gray's eyes tracked the movement, his body tensing slightly, but the trust built over the past hours held. "These are going to help us get that heavy chain off. Nothing to be afraid of." Alex demonstrated the bolt cutters' movement in the air, letting Gray hear the sound they made. Each time the metal clinked, he offered gentle reassurance, watching as Gray processed this new stimulus. The dog's reactions told their own story, initial fear giving way to cautious curiosity, his intelligent eyes studying the tool that would finally free him. Moving with practiced care, Alex positioned himself near the chain's anchor point. Gray watched intently, his breathing quickening but showing no signs of aggression. 7 years of weight and weather had left the chain deeply embedded in the ground, its links thick with rust and grime. Alex felt rage rising in his throat at the sight, but kept his voice steady, continuing his gentle monologue. "Just a little longer now," he murmured, carefully positioning the bolt cutters. "You've carried this weight for 7 years. That ends tonight." The first attempt to cut through the metal produced a harsh grinding sound that made Gray flinch. Alex immediately stopped, giving the dog time to settle. "It's okay, boy. We'll take it as slow as you need." Linda approached quietly with a flashlight, its beam carefully angled to provide light without startling Gray. The illumination revealed the full extent of the chain's cruelty, deep grooves worn into the metal where it had rubbed against the ground, year after year. Alex worked methodically, link by link, each cut accompanied by soft words of encouragement. The breakthrough came with a sudden snap. The first section of chain fell away, its weight hitting the ground with a dull thud. Gray jumped at the sound but didn't retreat, his eyes fixed on the separated metal with an expression that seemed almost disbelieving. Alex paused, letting him process this first taste of freedom. "See that, buddy? That's the beginning." Alex's voice cracked with emotion. "But we've got more work to do." He moved to the next section, his movements growing more confident as Gray remained calm. Each broken link seemed to release not just physical weight but years of accumulated trauma. The final cut required the most delicate touch. This was the section around Gray's neck where the metal had worn away fur and flesh. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he positioned the bolt cutters, knowing one wrong move could startle Gray and undo everything they'd achieved. "Almost there, brave boy, just one more moment." With a final decisive snap, the chain fell away completely. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Gray stood frozen, as if uncertain what to do with this new reality. The heavy collar that had been his constant companion for 7 years lay in pieces on the ground. His neck, finally exposed, bore the scars of his long imprisonment. The moment that followed would stay with Alex forever. Gray took one tentative step forward, then stopped, seemingly confused by the absence of resistance. He took another step, then another, each movement becoming more confident as he realized the chain's restriction was gone. His entire body language began to change, shoulders relaxing, head lifting, tail uncurling slightly from its defensive position. Linda, still holding the flashlight, couldn't hold back her tears. "Look at him, Alex," she whispered. "He's remembering how to move freely." Gray was now walking in a straight line for the first time in 7 years, no longer bound to his circular path. Each step seemed to awaken something in him, a memory of freedom perhaps, or the discovery of a new possibility. Alex remained seated on the ground, holding out his hand as Gray explored his new range of movement. The dog kept returning to him between explorations, as if checking that this miracle was real, that his newfound freedom wasn't just another dream. Each return brought him a little closer, his trust growing with each confirmation that the chain was truly gone. "The physical chain is gone," Alex said softly to Linda, watching as Gray discovered he could now reach the grassy area that had been just beyond his reach for so long. "But the real work of breaking his emotional chains is just beginning." The first week at Second Chance Rehabilitation Center marked the beginning of Gray's journey toward healing. Alex had prepared a special room for him, a quiet space with soft lighting, heated floors, and a plush bed position to allow Gray to see both the door and window. The walls were soundproofed to minimize startling noises, and classical music played softly through hidden speakers. Dr. Sarah Thompson's initial medical examination revealed the full extent of Gray's physical challenges. Beyond the obvious wounds around his neck, he suffered from severe muscle atrophy in his hind legs, dental issues from years of poor nutrition, and arthritis in his joints from constant exposure to cold and damp conditions. "His physical recovery will take months," she explained to Alex, "but it's his psychological healing that will be our biggest challenge." The early days were marked by small victories and setbacks. Gray would allow Alex to approach but remained deeply suspicious of other staff members. He had particular difficulty with male voices and sudden movements from his right side, likely triggers from his past abuse. Alex worked with the team to develop specific protocols: approach only from the left, speak softly before entering his space, no sudden movements. Physical therapy began gradually. Emily Chen, the center's rehabilitation specialist, designed a program that started with simple stretching exercises. "We need to rebuild his muscle memory," she explained, demonstrating gentle movements that Alex could do with Gray. "His body has forgotten how to move normally after years of restricted movement." The pool therapy sessions proved particularly transformative. In the warm water, supported by a special flotation vest, Gray discovered he could move without pain. Initially fearful of the water, he gradually began to show enthusiasm for these sessions, his tail wagging slightly when Alex brought out the pool harness. The weightlessness seemed to free not just his body but his spirit as well. Nutrition played a crucial role in his recovery. Dr. Thompson developed a specialized diet to address years of malnourishment. "We're seeing improvement in his coat already," she noted during week 3, pointing to areas where new fur was beginning to grow. "His body is finally getting the nutrients it needs to heal." The breakthrough in Gray's emotional rehabilitation came unexpectedly during his 4th week at the center. A young rescue puppy named Luna, recently brought in from a hoarding case, had escaped from her enclosure and found her way to Gray's room. The staff watched in amazement as Gray, instead of showing aggression, gently nudged the puppy back toward safety. This interaction revealed a nurturing side of his personality that had survived years of trauma. Alex began incorporating controlled interactions with Luna into Gray's rehabilitation program. The puppy's innocent playfulness seemed to awaken something in Gray, a reminder perhaps of his own lost puppyhood. Staff members would often find him lying patiently while Luna clambered over him, his eyes soft and watchful. The physical changes became more apparent as weeks turned into months. Gray's gait smoothed out as his muscle strength improved. The rigid defensiveness in his posture gradually softened. His coat, now properly nourished and regularly groomed, regained its natural luster. Most notably, his eyes lost their haunted look, replaced by a growing curiosity about the world around him. Learning to play again was a particularly poignant aspect of his rehabilitation. Alex would spend hours sitting on the floor of Gray's room simply rolling a soft ball back and forth. At first, Gray would watch with confusion, but gradually he began to show interest. His first playbow, a natural dog gesture he'd likely not used in years, brought tears to Alex's eyes. The garden sessions became a daily highlight. Gray discovered the joy of feeling grass under his paws, of following interesting scents, of simply moving freely through space. Alex noticed how he would pause sometimes, nose lifted to the wind, seeming to savor his freedom. These moments of pure dog joy were precious victories in his recovery. Night terrors remained a challenge. Gray would sometimes wake trembling, haunted by memories of his past life. Alex installed a small bed in the room and spent many nights there, his presence offering comfort when the darkness brought back old fears. Gradually, the episodes became less frequent, though they never completely disappeared. By the 3rd month, Gray began showing interest in other dogs at the center. Through carefully managed introductions, he learned to interact with dogs of different sizes and temperaments. His gentle nature emerged more strongly. He showed particular patience with nervous or fearful dogs, as if recognizing in them his own past trauma. The most significant milestone came when Gray started responding to basic training commands. This wasn't just about obedience, it was about building confidence and trust. Each successful interaction, each sit or come, followed by gentle praise, helped strengthen his bond with humans and his belief in his own worth. Alex documented every step of Gray's recovery, keeping detailed notes and video records. His journey isn't just about healing one dog, he explained to his staff. It's about understanding how to help others like him, about proving that no dog is beyond hope. The transformation they witnessed daily proved the truth of these words. Margaret Sullivan first visited Second Chance Rehabilitation Center on a crisp autumn morning, her silver hair neatly pinned back, clutching a worn leather handbag. At 68, she carried herself with quiet dignity, though grief had left its subtle marks on her face. She had read about Gray's rescue in the local newspaper and felt an inexplicable connection to his story. The past year had been devastating for Margaret. Her husband of 45 years, Thomas, had died suddenly of a heart attack while tending their beloved garden. Just 3 months later, their only son Michael was killed in a car accident, leaving Margaret alone in the Victorian cottage that had once echoed with family laughter. The double tragedy had pushed her into deep depression, leaving her struggling to find purpose in her suddenly empty life. "I used to be a librarian," she told Alex during their first meeting, her voice soft but steady. "For 30 years I helped children find their way through stories. Now I find myself needing a new story of my own." She paused, looking through the observation window at Gray, who was cautiously exploring his exercise area. "When I read about his 7 years alone, something resonated. Perhaps we both need a new chapter." Alex noticed how Margaret sat quietly, making no demands on Gray's attention. Unlike other potential adopters who tried to force interaction, she simply opened a book to kill a mockingbird and began reading aloud in a gentle, melodious voice. Gray, who typically remained distant with visitors, lifted his head to listen. During subsequent visits, Margaret shared more of her story. She and Thomas had always wanted dogs but had waited until retirement, planning to fill their golden years with the joy of canine companionship. The garden cottage they'd lovingly restored was meant to be a haven for rescue dogs. Thomas had even built a special ramp for older dogs, she explained, wiping away tears. He never got to see it used. Her visits became regular, 3 times a week, each time bringing a new book to read. She would sit in the garden area, respecting Gray's space, simply reading aloud while he listened. The staff noticed how Gray began to anticipate her visits, his ears perking up at the sound of her car in the parking lot. There was something about her calm presence that seemed to resonate with his healing spirit. One rainy afternoon, Margaret arrived looking particularly fragile. It was the anniversary of Thomas's death, and grief sat heavily on her shoulders. As she settled into her usual chair, her voice trembling as she opened her book, something extraordinary happened. Gray, who had been watching from his favorite corner, slowly approached and laid his head on her lap, his first voluntary contact with anyone besides Alex. The moment brought tears to everyone who witnessed it. Margaret gently placed her hand on Gray's head, and they sat together in silence, 2 souls finding comfort in shared understanding of loss and loneliness. "You know, don't you," she whispered to him. "You know what it's like to lose everything and have to start again." As weeks passed, Margaret's visits became longer. She brought photos of her garden, sharing with Alex her plans to create a safe haven there. "Thomas always said gardens are for healing," she explained, showing pictures of the sprawling backyard with its mature trees and secluded corners. Maybe it could help heal Gray too. The transformation in Margaret was as remarkable as Gray's. Her eyes regained their sparkle and her step became lighter. She began bringing homemade treats for all the dogs at the center, carefully following Dr. Thompson's nutritional guidelines. The staff noticed how she would spend time with other rescued animals, offering the same patient, gentle presence that had helped earn Gray's trust. During one visit, Margaret shared a surprising connection. "I think I saw Gray once years ago," she revealed to Alex. "I was driving past the Peterson property and saw him straining at his chain, trying to reach something. I called animal control, but nothing came of it. I've carried that guilt ever since." Her voice broke. "If only I'd done more." Alex watched as Margaret pulled out an old diary. In it, she had documented her calls about Gray, dozens of them over the years, each one met with bureaucratic delays or dismissals. "I felt so helpless," she admitted. just like I felt when I couldn't save Thomas, couldn't save Michael. But maybe now, finally, I can help save him. The parallel between Margaret and Gray's journeys became clear to everyone at the center. Both had endured profound loss, both had withdrawn from the world, and both were gradually finding their way back through their unexpected connection. Margaret's patient, understanding approach matched perfectly with Gray's need for gentle, consistent presence. As Christmas approached, Margaret brought something special to share, an old photo album. "This was our family," she told Gray, who sat attentively beside her chair. "Thomas, Michael, our life together. I haven't shown these to anyone since." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Gray pressed closer to her side, offering the same comfort she had given him over the past months. As winter settled over Second Chance Rehabilitation Center, Gray's relationship with the staff evolved in ways that touched everyone's hearts. Each team member played a unique role in his recovery, and in turn, Gray began showing different facets of his personality to each of them. Emily Chin, the physical therapist, discovered Gray's playful side during their morning sessions. What started as strictly therapeutic exercises gradually transformed into moments of joy. She would laugh as Gray, growing stronger each day, would initiate their routine by bringing her the special blue therapy ball. "He's teaching me as much about resilience as I'm teaching him about movement," she told Alex one morning, watching Gray proudly mastering a new balance exercise. Dr. Sarah Thompson's medical checkups became opportunities for trust building. Initially requiring Alex's presence for any examination, Gray now willingly followed her into the treatment room. She kept a special jar of organic treats in her office, and staff would smile seeing Gray sitting patiently by her door during his weekly weigh-ins. "His physical recovery is remarkable," she noted, "but it's his willingness to trust again that truly amazes me." The night security guard, James Wilson, formed an unexpected bond with Gray during the quiet hours. James would often find Gray waiting by his room door during the midnight rounds, ready for their peaceful walks in the moonlit garden. These nighttime encounters helped Gray overcome his fear of male figures, as James's gentle presence and quiet demeanor provided a new model of masculine energy. Katie Martinez, the young intern responsible for feeding schedules, became Gray's special morning friend. His tail would wag at the sound of her humming as she approached with breakfast. She developed a game of hiding small treats in puzzle toys, helping stimulate his mind while building his confidence. "He's so gentle taking treats now," she observed. "Nothing like the frightened dog who first arrived." The breakthrough with the maintenance staff came gradually. Tom Peterson, who had initially needed to work around Gray's schedule due to the dog's fear of tools, found himself with an curious assistant. Gray would watch intently as Tom fixed things around the center, his initial fear of maintenance equipment replaced by fascination. Tom started narrating his work, and soon Gray became known as the center's supervisor, monitoring repairs with careful attention. Even Linda Parker, who had seen Gray at his most defensive during the rescue, developed a special relationship with him. During her weekly visits to check on various cases, she would find Gray waiting to escort her on her rounds. "He seems to want to help other scared dogs," she noticed. "It's like he remembers his own journey and wants to show them it's okay." The most touching relationships developed between Gray and the center's other residents. Staff noticed how he would position himself near the kennels of newly arrived dogs, offering a calm presence during their first frightening nights. With puppies, he showed endless patience, allowing them to climb over him and gently correcting their overenthusiastic behavior. One particularly memorable incident occurred when a severely traumatized shepherd mix named Storm arrived. While the staff struggled to approach the terrified dog, Gray sat quietly outside her kennel day after day. His peaceful presence eventually encouraged Storm to venture closer to the kennel door, and through his example, she began to trust the staff. The kitchen became another place where Gray's personality blossomed. Chef Maria Gonzalez, who prepared special meals for the dogs with dietary needs, found herself with a polite but persistent observer. Gray would lie in the doorway watching her work, and she swore he could tell when she was preparing his special anti-inflammatory diet. "He's become our food critic," she joked, "but his reviews are always kind." During group training sessions, Gray began assisting naturally with newer dogs. Sarah Jenkins, the head trainer, was amazed by his intuitive understanding of fearful dogs. He knows exactly how to approach them, when to back off, when to encourage. He's becoming quite the therapy dog without any formal training. The administrative staff also fell under Gray's gentle spell. Reception desk volunteers would find small gifts left at their stations, a favorite toy or ball, brought as a greeting each morning. Gray seemed to understand that these people were part of his extended family, each one contributing to his new life in their own way. Perhaps the most profound impact was on the center's youngest volunteer, 16-year-old Amy Chin, Emily's daughter, who struggled with social anxiety. Gray would seek her out during her weekend shifts, lying quietly beside her as she filed paperwork or sorted donations. Her mother noticed how Amy's confidence grew through these interactions, the silent support of the once fearful dog helping her find her own strength. As Christmas approached, the staff prepared for their annual holiday celebration. In previous years, Gray would have been too overwhelmed for such an event. But this year, he moved confidently through the gathering, greeting his many friends, accepting gentle pets, and even participating in the group photo, a far cry from the dog who once feared human touch. The crisis began with a certified letter delivered to Second Chance Rehabilitation Center on a cold January morning. Alex's hands trembled as he read the document. The Petersons had filed a legal claim for Gray's return, along with allegations of theft and property damage during the rescue. More disturbing was the attached documentation citing Gray's history of aggression and demanding his evaluation as a dangerous animal. The timing couldn't have been worse. The county had recently passed stricter regulations regarding aggressive dogs following a series of incidents in neighboring towns. The Petersons' lawyer, Richard Coleman, had cleverly used Gray's documented defensive behavior during his rescue as evidence of dangerous tendencies. The petition called for an immediate danger assessment, with euthanasia recommended as a public safety measure. Linda rushed to the center as soon as she heard the news. "This is absurd," she fumed, reviewing the paperwork. "They abandoned him. They were evicted. How can they possibly claim ownership now?" But the legal framework wasn't so simple. The Petersons claimed they had been looking for Gray since the eviction, painting themselves as concerned owners separated from their pet during a difficult time. The danger assessment order couldn't be delayed. Within days, a panel of county officials arrived at the center: an animal control officer, a veterinary behaviorist, and a public safety representative. Their presence sent ripples of anxiety through the staff. Gray, sensing the tension, stayed close to Alex during the evaluation. The Petersons' lawyer had built a compelling case on paper. He had gathered statements from former neighbors about Gray's aggressive barking, documentation of the numerous complaints filed over the years, and even grainy video footage of Gray lunging at his chain when people passed by. Each piece of evidence, taken out of context, painted a picture of a dangerous animal. Dr. Thompson presented Gray's medical records, showing the extent of neglect and abuse he had suffered. "These scars tell the real story," she argued, pointing out the permanent marks left by years of chain confinement. His defensive behavior was a direct result of trauma and fear, not aggression, but the panel seemed more focused on liability concerns than on understanding the context of Gray's past behavior. The evaluation itself was grueling. Gray had to undergo a series of standardized tests designed to assess his reactions to various stimuli: sudden noises, quick movements, the presence of other dogs, food guarding scenarios. Although he remained calm throughout most of the assessment, his slight hesitation when approached by an unfamiliar male evaluator was noted as a potential concern. Margaret Sullivan arrived unannounced during the evaluation, her presence providing silent support. She watched with tears in her eyes as Gray worked to understand what was expected of him, his trust in humans, so carefully rebuilt over months, being tested in ways he couldn't comprehend. When she tried to approach him, the evaluator stopped her, citing protocol requirements. Alex fought to maintain his professional composure while advocating for Gray. "You're looking at snapshot moments from his worst days," he argued during the panel's deliberation. "You have months of documentation showing his rehabilitation progress, his positive interactions with staff and other animals, his gentle nature with children during supervised visits." The preliminary findings hit like a physical blow. The panel cited ongoing concerns about public safety and documented history of aggressive behavior. They recommended an extended observation period at a county facility, a sterile, high-security environment that would undo months of emotional healing. More ominously, they left open the possibility of euthanasia if Gray showed any signs of aggression during this period. Linda immediately began working through her contacts in animal control, searching for precedents and alternatives. The staff rallied together, gathering evidence of Gray's transformation, videos of him playing gently with puppies, testimonials from volunteers, documentation of his role in helping rehabilitate other traumatized dogs. But the legal machinery moved with cold efficiency. A date was set for Gray's transfer to the county facility. The Petersons' lawyer suggested that euthanasia would be the most humane option given the circumstances, a statement that sent shockwaves through the rescue community. Alex spent every possible moment with Gray, aware that each day could be their last together. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, staying closer than usual, his eyes following Alex's movements with quiet concern. At night, Alex would sit in Gray's room, documenting every positive interaction, every sign of progress, building a case for the dog's life. Margaret's normally gentle demeanor hardened into determination. They didn't break his spirit with that change, she declared during an emergency staff meeting, and we won't let them break it with their laws. She began reaching out to her contacts from her years as a librarian, including several local journalists and a city council member who had been one of her regular patrons. The center staff watched helplessly as the legal noose tightened around Gray's future. The dog, who had survived 7 years of physical chains, now faced an even more dangerous restraint, the cold, impersonal machinery of legal judgment that threatened to end his journey just as he had begun to trust again. Margaret Sullivan's campaign to save Gray began with a single letter to the editor of the Springfield Herald. Her eloquent words describing both Gray's transformation and her own journey from grief to healing through their connection struck a chord with readers. The story quickly spread through social media, catching the attention of local news stations and animal rights advocates. Within days, Margaret had transformed her Victorian cottage into a command center for the Save Gray campaign. Her dining room table, once the setting for family dinners, now held stacks of petitions and letters of support. Her former library colleagues helped organize a database of similar cases where rehabilitated dogs had successfully integrated into communities. The breakthrough came when Tommy Wilson, now a teenager, recognized Gray from the newspaper coverage. "That's the dog who saved me," he told his parents, recounting the night he had fallen through the ice. The Wilsons contacted Margaret immediately, and Tommy's story added a powerful new dimension to Gray's defense. Here was proof that even during his darkest days, chained and neglected, Gray had chosen to save a human life. Local businesses began displaying Save Gray posters in their windows. The owner of Pete's Pet Supply organized a donation drive for the rehabilitation center. Children from the elementary school where Margaret had worked as a librarian created hundreds of handmade cards pleading for Gray's life, each one telling their own stories of pet love and redemption. Margaret's connections in the community proved invaluable. Her book club members, many of whom held positions of influence in local government and media, began making calls. The retired judge who had attended her weekly reading sessions took a particular interest in the legal aspects of the case, offering pro bono advice to challenge the dangerous dog classification. The movement gained momentum when Dr. Rebecca Chin, a renowned veterinary behaviorist, offered to conduct an independent evaluation of Gray. Her credentials were impeccable, and her assessment directly challenged the county's findings. "What I observe is not aggression," she stated in her report, but rather a remarkable case of rehabilitation and resilience. Social media played a crucial role in spreading Gray's story. Local animal rescue groups shared videos of Gray's gentle interactions with other dogs at the center. A particularly touching clip of him helping a terrified puppy learn to walk on a leash went viral, reaching millions of viewers worldwide and drawing support from international animal welfare organizations. Margaret organized peaceful demonstrations outside the county courthouse, where supporters gathered with their own rescued dogs. Each Saturday morning, the crowd grew larger, their signs telling stories of second chances and redemption. Local news coverage captured the diversity of the supporters, from children with their family pets to veterans with service dogs, all united in their belief in Gray's right to life. The pressure began to affect local politics. County council members found their offices flooded with calls and emails. The mayor, sensing the public mood, requested a review of the dangerous dog ordinance. Animal behavior experts from nearby universities offered to testify about the success rates of rehabilitation programs. Margaret's personal testimony at the county hearing was particularly moving. She spoke not just of Gray's transformation but of the healing he had brought to her own life. In saving Gray, she declared, her voice strong despite her tears, "We saved something in ourselves, our capacity for compassion, our belief in second chances." The campaign received unexpected support from former shelter workers who had known Gray as a puppy. They came forward with records showing his gentle temperament before the Petersons acquired him, directly contradicting claims about inherent aggression. These early records, combined with Dr. Thompson's documentation of abuse-related injuries, began to shift the narrative. Local businesses continued to show their support in creative ways. The Springfield Diner offered Gray's special with proceeds going to his legal defense fund. A local t-shirt company printed second chance shirts featuring Gray's story, which quickly became a common sight around town. Even the local coffee shop created a Gray's blend with part of the sales supporting the rehabilitation center. Margaret's garden became a symbol of hope as volunteers helped her prepare it as a potential forever home for Gray. They installed secure fencing, created shaded rest areas, and planted dog-safe flowers. The transformation of the space paralleled their mission, taking something damaged by loss and neglect and nurturing it back to life. The campaign reached a critical point when investigative journalists began looking into the Petersons' history. Their research uncovered a pattern of negligence that extended beyond Gray's case, including unpaid veterinary bills and complaints from previous residences. This evidence further weakened their claim to responsible ownership. The courtroom of Judge Sarah Blackwood fell silent as the hearing for Gray's fate began. The case had drawn unprecedented attention, with every seat filled and supporters gathering outside the courthouse. Margaret Sullivan sat in the front row, her silver hair neatly pinned, clutching the folder containing hundreds of letters supporting Gray's rehabilitation. The proceedings began with the prosecution presenting their case. Richard Coleman, the Petersons' lawyer, methodically laid out their argument. He displayed the old complaint records, emphasized the liability risks, and painted a picture of a dangerous animal masked by temporary good behavior. His presentation was cold, efficient, and focused entirely on past incidents and legal precedents. Alex Martinez took the stand first for the defense. Under questioning, he detailed Gray's transformation, supported by extensive documentation. "What we've witnessed isn't just rehabilitation," he testified, his voice steady and clear. "It's the emergence of Gray's true nature, the gentle, caring dog he was always meant to be before trauma and abuse shaped his responses." Dr. Sarah Thompson's medical testimony proved crucial. Her detailed records and photographs of Gray's injuries provided irrefutable evidence of long-term abuse. "These scars tell a story," she explained to the judge, pointing to X-rays showing healed fractures and tissue damage. "Not of aggression, but of survival under unimaginable conditions." The turning point came when Tommy Wilson took the stand. Now 15, he recounted the night Gray had saved him from drowning. "I was so cold and scared," he testified, his voice trembling with emotion. "But he kept pulling at me, even though his chain was hurting him. He didn't give up until I was safe." His testimony directly challenged the image of Gray as a dangerous animal. Linda Parker presented the animal control perspective, explaining how their initial caution during Gray's rescue had been based on fear responses that were both natural and temporary. "What we witnessed wasn't aggression," she clarified. "It was the defensive behavior of a traumatized animal. His transformation since then has been remarkable." The prosecution's case began to unravel when former neighbors of the Petersons took the stand. They described years of witnessing Gray's neglect, their failed attempts to intervene, and the Petersons' threatening responses to any offers of help. Their testimonies painted a damning picture of systematic abuse and negligence. Dr. Rebecca Chin's expert testimony provided scientific context for Gray's rehabilitation. She presented case studies of similarly traumatized dogs who had successfully integrated into families, explaining how Gray's progress actually exceeded typical recovery patterns. Her professional reputation lent significant weight to the defense's position. Margaret's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears. She spoke of her own journey from grief to healing, paralleling Gray's transformation. "We saved each other," she explained, describing their growing bond and Gray's gentle nature. Her sincerity and the depth of her commitment to Gray's welfare were undeniable. The defense team presented video evidence of Gray's daily life at the rehabilitation center, playing with puppies, helping calm other traumatized dogs, interacting gently with staff and visitors. The contrast between these images and the prosecution's portrayal of a dangerous animal was striking. James Peterson's cross-examination proved disastrous for the prosecution. Under questioning, he couldn't explain the lack of veterinary records, the inconsistencies in his complaints about Gray's behavior, or his absence during the eviction. His testimony crumbled as he contradicted his own previous statements about Gray's history. The final day of the hearing brought a surprise witness, the bank officer who had handled the Petersons' eviction. He testified about finding Gray severely malnourished and neglected during the property inspection, directly contradicting the Petersons' claims of responsible ownership. During closing arguments, the defense attorney emphasized the transformation in Gray's life and the community's investment in his rehabilitation. This case is about more than one dog, he argued. It's about our belief in redemption, our capacity for compassion, and our responsibility to correct past injustices. Judge Blackwood's chambers fell silent as she delivered her ruling. Her decision would not only determine Gray's fate, but potentially set precedent for future cases involving rehabilitated dogs. Her careful review of the evidence, witness testimonies, and expert opinions had lasted several days. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Blackwood began to speak. She acknowledged the complexity of the case, but emphasized that the law must consider not just past behavior, but current circumstances and future potential. Her ruling would either validate the power of rehabilitation or reinforce fears about reformed animals. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, just 2 days after Gray's court victory. Alex was driving back to the rehabilitation center after picking up medical supplies when a drunk driver ran a red light, sending his truck spinning into a guardrail. The impact was severe, leaving him trapped in the crumpled vehicle as rain pounded against the broken windshield. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the extraction took over an hour. Alex remained conscious throughout, his thoughts fixed on the evening medication schedule for his charges at the center, particularly Gray's anti-anxiety medication. Even as paramedics worked to free him, he was trying to make calls, ensuring his patients would be cared for. The diagnosis at Springfield General Hospital was grim: multiple fractures in his right leg, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion. Surgery would be required, followed by months of rehabilitation. Dr. Wilson, the attending physician, was firm about the recovery timeline. "You're looking at a minimum of 3 months before you can return to full duties," he explained, watching Alex's face fall at the news. At the rehabilitation center, the staff struggled to maintain normalcy, but the animals sensed something was wrong. Gray, in particular, became increasingly agitated as days passed without Alex's presence. The evening routine they had established, quiet reading time followed by gentle training exercises, was disrupted, and Gray's anxiety began to manifest in concerning ways. Linda took charge of coordinating between the hospital and the center, dividing her time between visiting Alex and helping manage the facility. She brought Alex regular updates, but the news about Gray's deteriorating condition was hard to hear. "He's not sleeping through the night anymore," she reported. "He paces, whines, refuses his food unless Margaret hand feeds him." 5 days after the accident, against medical advice, Alex insisted on being wheeled to the hospital's garden for a video call with the center. The staff had set up a tablet in Gray's room, hoping the sight and sound of Alex would help calm him. When Gray heard Alex's voice through the speaker, his ears perked up instantly, and he rushed to the screen, whining and pawing at the image of his friend. The call was both heartening and heartbreaking. While Gray clearly recognized Alex's voice and seemed relieved to see him, the dog's distress at not being able to reach him was evident. Alex maintained a cheerful tone despite his pain, talking to Gray about being brave and promising to return soon. After the call ended, nurses found Alex quietly weeping in his wheelchair. Margaret spent extra hours at the center, trying to provide consistency for Gray, but the dog's progress seemed to be reversing. He became more withdrawn, showing signs of the defensive behavior they had worked so hard to overcome. The staff watched helplessly as their most remarkable success story began to slip away. Dr. Thompson adjusted Gray's medication, hoping to manage his increasing anxiety, but the emotional connection he had formed with Alex proved impossible to medicate away. Animals form deep attachments, she explained to the concerned staff. For Gray, Alex represents safety and stability. His absence is triggering memories of abandonment. The situation reached a critical point when Alex developed complications from his surgery and infection that extended his hospital stay by 2 weeks. The news hit the center hard, especially as Gray's condition continued to deteriorate. The dog, who had recently helped calm other traumatized animals, now spent his days huddled in the corner of his room, responding only to Margaret's gentle coaxing. Through it all, Alex fought his own battle with recovery, pushing himself in physical therapy, determined to return to his charges. His phone filled with video updates from the center, each one showing Gray's increasing withdrawal. The guilt and helplessness he felt, confined to his hospital bed while Gray struggled, added a psychological burden to his physical recovery. Gray's regression began subtly but accelerated rapidly in the weeks following Alex's accident. The confident, gentle dog who had become the center's unofficial therapy animal retreated into himself, his behavior increasingly reminiscent of his early days after rescue. Staff members watched helplessly as months of progress seemed to unravel before their eyes. The first signs appeared in his eating habits. Gray began refusing his regular meals, only accepting food when Margaret hand-fed him, just as Alex had done during their earliest interactions. His once healthy appetite diminished to nervous nibbling, leading to noticeable weight loss that concerned Dr. Thompson. Night times became particularly challenging. Gray's sleep patterns deteriorated completely, replaced by anxious pacing and distressed whining that echoed through the center's corridors. During these episodes, he would frantically search every room, his nose pressed to the ground as if tracking Alex's scent, only to return to his room more agitated than before. The most heartbreaking change was in his interactions with other animals. Gray, who had become known for his gentle guidance of newly rescued dogs, began isolating himself. The puppies he once played with would approach his room only to be met with turned backs and low growls. The staff had to relocate several rehabilitation cases that had depended on Gray's calming presence. His defensive behaviors resurfaced with alarming intensity. Sudden movements would trigger freezing or backing away, reminiscent of his reactions during the initial rescue. But the maintenance staff found themselves once again having to work around his schedule, as the sight of their tools brought back his fear responses. During one particularly difficult evening, Gray experienced what Dr. Thompson described as an emotional breakdown. A thunderstorm had triggered his anxiety, and without Alex's usual calming presence, Gray became overwhelmed. He retreated to the corner of his room, shaking uncontrollably, refusing all attempts at comfort, even from Margaret. The video calls with Alex, initially helpful, seemed to make things worse. After each call, Gray would spend hours searching the center, his distress escalating when he couldn't find Alex. The staff made the difficult decision to discontinue the calls, hoping to prevent this cycle of raised and dashed hopes. Physical symptoms began manifesting alongside his emotional distress. His coat lost its healthy shine, becoming dull and brittle. The scar tissue around his neck, long healed from his years in chains, became irritated as he compulsively scratched at it during anxious episodes. Dr. Thompson had to fit him with a protective collar to prevent self-injury. Perhaps most concerning was the return of his hypervigilance. Gray began reacting to every sound and movement as if it were a potential threat. The relaxed, trusting demeanor he had developed was replaced by constant alertness. His eyes, once soft and expressive, became watchful and wary again. Margaret spent hours sitting with him, reading aloud as she had always done, but even her familiar presence provided little comfort. Gray would rest his head on her lap briefly before resuming his anxious pacing, as if unable to settle into the peace he had once found in their quiet moments together. The staff's attempts to maintain his routine only seemed to emphasize Alex's absence. Each failed enrichment activity, each rejected interaction, reinforced the fear that they might be losing the remarkable progress they had witnessed in Gray's rehabilitation. The situation became a painful reminder of how fragile emotional healing can be and how deeply trauma responses can be rooted. The crisis struck without warning one cold February morning. Margaret had arrived at the center for her usual morning reading session with Gray when she suddenly clutched her chest, dropping her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice as she collapsed. Emily Chen, who had been nearby preparing for a therapy session, immediately called for emergency services. Gray's reaction was immediate and extraordinary. Despite his recent withdrawal and anxiety, he rushed to Margaret's side, positioning himself protectively over her as she lay unconscious. His previous fear responses disappeared entirely, replaced by an intense focus on the woman who had become his closest friend after Alex. When the paramedics arrived, they faced an unexpected challenge. Gray refused to leave Margaret's side, not aggressively but with quiet determination. It took Linda's gentle coaxing and the promise of following to the hospital to convince him to let the medical team work. Even then, he watched every movement with intense concentration, whining softly as they lifted Margaret onto the stretcher. The diagnosis at Springfield General Hospital was severe heart attack brought on by stress and exhaustion. The doctors discovered that Margaret had been pushing herself beyond her limits, spending long hours at the center trying to support Gray through his regression while neglecting her own health. The combination of emotional strain and physical exhaustion had taken its toll. In a twist of fate, Margaret was placed in the same ward where Alex was still recovering from his accident. The staff, familiar with both their stories, arranged for their rooms to be close to each other. Alex, now able to move with crutches, would hobble to Margaret's room, their shared concern for Gray creating a stronger bond between them. Back at the center, Gray's behavior took another unexpected turn. The dog, who had been lost in his own anxiety, suddenly found a new purpose. Each morning he would wait by the door, expecting to accompany Linda on her daily hospital visits. When allowed in to see Margaret, he would carefully lay his head on her bed, his presence bringing comfort that no medication could provide. The doctors were amazed by Margaret's response to Gray's visits. Her vital signs would improve noticeably when he was present, and she seemed more engaged in her recovery process. They began incorporating his visits into her therapy schedule, noting how his presence motivated her to participate more fully in rehabilitation exercises. During one particularly moving visit, Margaret, still weak but determined, shared with Alex her fears about letting everyone down. "I thought I had to be strong for Gray," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I forgot that sometimes strength means knowing when to rest." Gray, sensing her distress, pressed closer to her bed, offering the same comfort she had given him so many times. The center staff rallied around both Margaret and Gray, creating a schedule to ensure neither was left alone. Volunteers took turns bringing Margaret books and updates about the center, while Gray received extra attention and care during the hours he couldn't be at the hospital. The crisis had revealed not just vulnerability but also the depth of connection that had grown between all involved in Gray's journey. The situation became a powerful reminder of how healing often works in unexpected ways. Margaret's illness had pulled Gray out of his own emotional spiral, giving him a new focus beyond his anxiety about Alex's absence. In helping Margaret heal, he was finding his own way back to stability. The revelation about Gray's heroic past came to light during Margaret's recovery at Springfield General Hospital. Tommy Wilson, now 15, had been volunteering in the hospital's youth program when he recognized Margaret from the local news coverage of Gray's case. The moment he saw the photograph of Gray beside her bed, memories of that winter night 7 years ago came flooding back. "That's him," Tommy exclaimed, his hands shaking as he pointed to Gray's picture. "That's the dog who saved my life." His outburst drew the attention of the nursing staff, including Sarah Collins, who had been caring for both Margaret and Alex. As Tommy began sharing his story, the full impact of Gray's past heroism began to unfold. Tommy recounted the details of that frigid February night when, as an 8-year-old, he had snuck out looking for his lost kite near the Peterson property. His voice trembled as he described falling through the ice, the paralyzing cold, and the moment he thought he would die. "I remember gray fur," he said, "and feeling something pull me out. I always thought I had somehow crawled out myself, but now I remember it was him. It was Gray." Alex, listening from his wheelchair, began piecing together the timeline. The incident had occurred during Gray's darkest days of confinement, when he was still chained and considered dangerous by the neighborhood. Despite his own suffering, Gray had somehow found the strength and courage to save a child's life. Linda Parker launched an immediate investigation into the incident reports from that period. She discovered partially filed police reports mentioning a near-drowning incident, but no follow-up investigation. The Petersons, she learned, had been away that weekend, and the incident had been largely forgotten in the community's records. Further investigation revealed more details. Mrs. Wilson, Tommy's mother, still had the coat her son had worn that night. The tears in the fabric matched exactly the pattern that would be made by a dog's careful grip, and traces of Gray's fur were still embedded in the material after all these years. The physical evidence was compelling, but it was Tommy's detailed recollection that proved most powerful. He remembered the sound of the chain dragging across the ice, the gentle but firm grip on his coat, and the way Gray had kept pulling until he was safely on solid ground. I was so cold and scared, Tommy recalled, but I remember feeling safe when he had hold of me. He didn't let go until I was out of danger. Dr. Thompson examined old photographs of Gray from the time of his rescue, identifying marks on his neck that corresponded with the extra strain such a rescue would have caused. The scar tissue told its own story. Gray had literally pulled against his chains to the point of injury to reach Tommy that night. Margaret, from her hospital bed, listened to Tommy's story with tears streaming down her face. The dog, who had become her closest companion, had been a hero long before she met him. His capacity for compassion had survived years of abuse, showing itself in the most crucial moment when a child's life hung in the balance. The Wilson family came forward with their own documentation: hospital records from Tommy's treatment for hypothermia, dated photographs showing the ice-covered pond, even Tommy's diary entries from the weeks following the incident. Each piece of evidence further confirmed Gray's extraordinary act of courage. Local news stations quickly picked up the story, and reporters began investigating other incidents from Gray's time at the Peterson property. They discovered several accounts of Gray alerting neighbors to potential dangers: a gas leak in an adjacent house, a small fire that could have spread, and even a lost toddler who had wandered too close to the street. Alex watched as Gray's true nature was finally revealed to the world. The dog, who had been labeled as dangerous, had actually been a guardian angel to his community, performing his self-appointed duties despite his chains, despite his abuse, despite everything that should have hardened his heart against humans. The unraveling of the Petersons' dark past began when investigative reporter Sarah Mitchell from the Springfield Herald started digging deeper into their history following Tommy Wilson's revelation. What she uncovered was a disturbing pattern of animal abuse and fraud that stretched across 3 states in nearly a decade. Working with Linda Parker, Mitchell discovered that the Petersons had used multiple aliases over the years, adopting animals from various shelters only to abandon them when they moved to new locations. Bank records revealed a pattern: they would settle in a community, obtain pets through adoption or purchase, collect donations for supposed animal care, then disappear when questions started arising about the animal's welfare. The breakthrough came from a former neighbor in Connecticut who recognized James Peterson's photo in the news coverage. Under his previous name, Robert Andrews, he had been investigated for running an illegal puppy breeding operation. Though charges were never filed, the neighbor provided photographs and documentation that clearly showed the same systematic neglect that Gray had endured. Sarah Peterson's carefully crafted image as a reluctant participant in her husband's schemes crumbled when financial records emerged showing her active role in their operations. She had maintained detailed ledgers of their fraudulent activities, including records of donations collected for animals that never received care. These documents, found in a storage unit they had abandoned, provided damning evidence of their deliberate exploitation. Local veterinarians began coming forward with their own stories. Dr. James Wilson recalled treating several dogs belonging to the Petersons, each showing signs of neglect similar to Gray's condition. He had reported his concerns to authorities, but the Petersons had always managed to provide just enough care to avoid serious investigation, then would switch to different clinics before suspicions grew too strong. The investigation revealed a sophisticated system of manipulation. The Petersons would specifically target affluent neighborhoods, presenting themselves as upstanding citizens who had fallen on hard times. They would use their pets, including Gray, to gain sympathy and financial support from neighbors, while simultaneously spreading stories about the animal's dangerous behavior to justify their harsh treatment. Police records from their time in Massachusetts showed multiple complaints about animal welfare, but the Petersons had perfected the art of staying just within legal boundaries. They would move before any single complaint could develop into a full investigation, leaving behind a trail of confused and concerned neighbors who had tried to intervene. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of their connection to an underground network of illegal dog fighting. While they had never directly participated, financial records showed they had sold several dogs to known operators, fully aware of the animal's likely fate. This revelation cast their treatment of Gray in an even darker light. His chain had kept him from becoming another victim of their schemes. The scope of their deception became clear when Mitchell uncovered their involvement in a fraudulent animal rescue organization. Operating under yet another alias, they had collected thousands in donations for a non-existent shelter, using Gray's photo and story to solicit funds that went directly into their personal accounts. Former employees of various veterinary clinics pieced together how the Petersons would strategically visit different facilities, ensuring no single clinic could document a pattern of neglect. They would often claim their pets' injuries were from fights with other animals, using these incidents to build paper trails supporting their claims about their dog's aggressive tendencies. As the evidence mounted, other victims of their schemes began to emerge. Families who had entrusted pets to their care, believing their stories about providing temporary homes, never to see their animals again. Community organizations that had provided financial assistance only to discover their donations had been misused. Each new revelation painted a picture of calculated cruelty masked by careful manipulation. The investigation culminated in the discovery of a hidden camera footage from a neighbor's security system, capturing James Peterson's violent treatment of Gray and other animals. The footage, though difficult to watch, provided irrefutable evidence of the deliberate nature of their abuse, finally stripping away their carefully constructed facade of respectability. Local law enforcement, armed with this comprehensive evidence, began building a criminal case against the Petersons. The charges would include multiple counts of animal cruelty, fraud, and operating an illegal enterprise. Their years of evading consequences through careful manipulation and strategic moves were finally coming to an end. The revelation of Gray's true nature and the Petersons' deception triggered a profound shift in the community's understanding of dangerous dogs. The story became a catalyst for broader conversations about animal behavior, trauma, and the power of rehabilitation. Local media outlets began featuring stories of other misunderstood dogs, challenging long-held assumptions about aggressive behavior. Springfield's Animal Control Department, led by Linda Parker, initiated a comprehensive review of all cases involving dogs labeled as dangerous. They discovered that many of these animals, like Gray, were reacting to trauma or abuse rather than exhibiting inherent aggression. The findings led to the implementation of new assessment protocols that considered an animal's history and environmental factors before making behavioral determinations. The local school system invited Alex Martinez to develop an educational program about animal behavior and responsible pet ownership. In classrooms across the district, children learned about reading dog body language, understanding fear responses, and recognizing signs of animal abuse. Gray's story became a powerful teaching tool, helping young people understand that aggressive behavior often masks fear and pain. Dr. Thompson organized a series of workshops for veterinarians and animal welfare workers, using Gray's case to demonstrate the importance of looking beyond surface behaviors. She presented medical evidence showing how physical abuse and neglect can manifest as defensive aggression and how proper rehabilitation can reverse these behaviors. Her presentations included before and after brain scans showing the physiological changes in traumatized dogs who received appropriate care. The impact reached beyond professional circles. Neighborhood watch groups began incorporating animal welfare awareness into their programs. Residents who had once quickly labeled dogs as dangerous now learned to recognize signs of distress and abuse. The community developed an informal network for reporting suspected animal cruelty, understanding that early intervention could prevent the escalation of defensive behaviors. Local shelters reported a significant increase in adoptions of dogs previously considered difficult. Families began to see past initial behavioral issues, inspired by Gray's transformation. The shelters adapted their adoption processes to include more comprehensive background information about each dog's history and specific rehabilitation needs. Margaret Sullivan's Garden became a gathering place for community education. She hosted weekly sessions where people could observe Gray's gentle interactions with other animals and learn about the rehabilitation process. These gatherings grew into informal support groups for owners of traumatized dogs, where people shared experiences and advice. The City Council revised its dangerous dog ordinances, introducing a more nuanced classification system that distinguished between truly aggressive animals and those showing trauma-based defensive behaviors. The new guidelines emphasized rehabilitation over punishment and required thorough evaluation before any dog could be labeled as dangerous. Real estate agents in the area began reporting an unexpected trend: homebuyers specifically asking about pet-friendly neighborhoods and proximity to animal rehabilitation facilities. The community's transformation into a hub for animal welfare awareness attracted families who shared these values, further strengthening the network of support for rescued animals. Local businesses joined the movement, with pet supply stores offering specialized training equipment and calming aids for traumatized dogs. Veterinary clinics expanded their behavioral health services, and some employers even began offering pet insurance that covered rehabilitation services. The economic impact of this shift helped cement the community's commitment to animal welfare. The most powerful evidence of the community's changed perspective came from the success stories that followed Gray's case. Dogs who might once have been euthanized were given second chances, and their transformations reinforced the new understanding that behavior is shaped by experience rather than predetermined by breed or past incidents. Tommy Wilson's testimony about Gray's heroism sparked a particular interest in understanding how dogs labeled as dangerous could simultaneously show extraordinary compassion. This led to research collaborations between local veterinarians and animal behaviorists, studying the complex relationships between trauma, protective instincts, and aggressive behavior. The ripple effects reached neighboring communities, with other municipalities sending representatives to study Springfield's new approach to animal welfare. Gray's story became a case study in police training programs, teaching officers how to better assess and handle situations involving supposedly dangerous dogs. By the end of the year, Springfield had earned a reputation as a model community for animal welfare and rehabilitation. The transformation from a place where dogs like Gray could be chained and abused to one where every animal was given a fair chance at rehabilitation represented more than just a policy change. It was a fundamental shift in how the community understood and valued animal lives. Gray's journey from a chained, traumatized dog to a certified therapy animal became the crowning achievement of his remarkable transformation. The process began organically during Margaret's hospital recovery, where his natural ability to comfort patients caught the attention of Dr. Sarah Williams, the hospital's rehabilitation director. Initially, Gray's hospital visits were solely focused on Margaret and Alex, but staff noticed how other patients responded to his presence. During his walks through the corridors, he would often pause outside rooms where patients were in particular distress, displaying an uncanny ability to sense emotional pain. His gentle demeanor and patient nature drew people to him, and soon hospital staff began requesting his presence for specific cases. The formal therapy dog training program designed by Alex and the hospital's behavioral health team built upon Gray's natural empathy. They discovered that his own history of trauma gave him a unique connection with patients dealing with PTSD and anxiety. Veterans in the rehabilitation ward found particular comfort in his presence, relating to his journey of overcoming past traumas. What made Gray exceptional as a therapy dog was his intuitive understanding of different needs. With elderly patients, he would move slowly and rest his head gently on their beds. With anxious children, he would playfully offer his paw or perform simple tricks to distract them from their fears. Each interaction seemed perfectly calibrated to the individual patient's emotional state. The certification process revealed Gray's extraordinary capabilities. He excelled in all areas of testing, showing remarkable patience during medical procedures, staying calm in crisis situations, and maintaining his gentle demeanor even in chaotic hospital environments. The evaluators noted that his own experience of healing seemed to inform his ability to support others through their recovery journeys. Children in the pediatric ward became some of Gray's most devoted friends. He would sit for hours with young patients undergoing chemotherapy, somehow knowing exactly when to offer gentle playfulness or quiet companionship. Parents reported that their children's anxiety about hospital visits significantly decreased when they knew Gray would be there. One particularly moving case involved a teenage girl who hadn't spoken since a traumatic accident. During her third session with Gray, she began whispering stories to him, gradually opening up about her experiences. The breakthrough led to significant progress in her therapy, with Gray serving as a bridge between her silent world and the path to recovery. In the psychiatric ward, Gray's impact was equally profound. His presence during therapy sessions helped patients feel safe enough to discuss their trauma. Dr. Thompson observed that Gray would often position himself closest to the patients who were struggling the most, offering silent support during difficult moments. The Rehabilitation Center developed a special program where Gray worked with other rescued dogs, helping them overcome their own trauma. His calm presence seemed to reassure nervous animals, showing them by example that healing was possible. Staff members nicknamed him the mentor after witnessing how younger dogs would mimic his relaxed behavior. Margaret proudly accompanied Gray on his therapy visits, watching as the dog who had once been deemed too dangerous to approach now brought comfort to hundreds of patients. His official therapy dog vest, embroidered with his name and the hospital logo, became a symbol of hope throughout the medical center. Alex, fully recovered from his accident, worked with the hospital to document Gray's methods, creating a training program for other rehabilitation centers working with traumatized animals. Gray's success challenged traditional assumptions about what was possible in animal rehabilitation and therapy work. Margaret's recovery brought more than just physical healing. It marked the beginning of a profound new chapter in her life. Her Victorian cottage, once a place of lonely memories, transformed into Hope Haven, a unique rehabilitation space for traumatized dogs and their potential adopters. The transformation began during her hospital stay when she started sketching plans for converting her property. The garden Thomas had lovingly tended became a therapeutic space, with secure fencing and specially designed areas for different stages of rehabilitation. The flower beds he had planted were preserved but now intermingled with dog-safe plants and sensory enrichment features. Working closely with Alex and the Rehabilitation Center, Margaret developed a program that bridged the gap between institutional rehabilitation and permanent homes. Hope Haven became a transitional space where dogs could adjust to home life in a controlled, supportive environment. Her years as a librarian proved unexpectedly valuable. She approached each dog's story with the same careful attention she had once given to organizing books. The living room, where she had once sat alone with her grief, became a welcoming space for potential adopters to connect with rescued dogs. Margaret's gift for storytelling helped people understand each dog's journey, teaching them to see past current behaviors to the loving companions these animals could become. Her own experience with Gray became a powerful testimony to the transformative power of patience and understanding. Margaret's health crisis had taught her the importance of balance. She established a network of volunteers, many of them retirees like herself, who shared the work of running Hope Haven. These volunteers, drawn by Margaret's vision and Gray's example, brought their own skills and experiences to the project. Some taught obedience classes, others helped with property maintenance, and many simply spent time helping dogs learn to trust again. The cottage's spare bedrooms were converted into specialized spaces for different needs. One became a quiet room for anxious dogs, another a socialization space for group activities. The kitchen, where Margaret had once cooked lonely meals, now bustled with volunteers preparing special diets and training treats. Perhaps most significantly, Margaret started a support group for people who had adopted traumatized dogs. Drawing on her own journey with Gray, she helped others understand the challenges and rewards of helping an injured soul heal. The monthly meetings in her garden became a community fixture, where success stories were shared and difficulties were met with understanding and practical advice. Her professional background as a librarian found new purpose as she meticulously documented each dog's progress, creating detailed profiles that helped match them with suitable homes. She developed a library of resources for adopters, covering everything from behavioral training to emotional support techniques. Working with local schools, Margaret established a reading program where children would practice reading aloud to rehabilitating dogs. This initiative served multiple purposes, helping children improve their reading skills while teaching dogs to associate human voices with comfort and safety. The program became so successful that there was a waiting list of both young readers and local schools wanting to participate. The heart attack that had seemed like an ending became instead a beginning. Margaret discovered that her own healing was deeply intertwined with the work she was doing. Each dog who found their way to Hope Haven brought new purpose to her life, and each successful adoption added another chapter to her story of renewal. Gray remained her constant companion through it all, his gentle presence a reminder of how far they had both come. Together they greeted each new arrival at Hope Haven, two survivors who had found purpose in helping others heal. Margaret often said that while Thomas had taught her about tending gardens, Gray had taught her about growing hope. The community celebration at Hope Haven took place on a perfect spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after Gray's court victory. The occasion was dual purpose: the official opening of Margaret's Rehabilitation Center and a reunion celebrating Gray's journey. The garden was in full bloom, Thomas's flowers creating a colorful backdrop for the gathering of people whose lives had been touched by one remarkable dog. Tommy Wilson, now 16, stood nervously at the podium set up on the lawn. Before him, gathered on chairs and blankets, sat over 200 people, rescue workers, hospital staff, former patients, adopted dogs, and their families. Gray lay at his feet, occasionally glancing up at the teenager who had once been the small boy he'd saved from the frozen pond. 7 years ago, Tommy began, his voice steady despite his emotions. I was just a kid who made a stupid mistake on a winter night. I didn't know then that the dog everyone feared would risk his own life to save mine. He paused, reaching down to touch Gray's head. But that's who Gray really is, someone who never stopped caring, even when the world gave him every reason to. The ceremony included presentations from various community members. Linda Parker spoke about the changes in animal control policies, now nicknamed Gray's Law, which mandated thorough evaluation of allegedly dangerous dogs. Dr. Thompson shared medical documents showing Gray's physical transformation, while Alex presented a video compilation of Gray's journey from rescue to therapy dog. Margaret's speech moved many to tears as she described how Gray had not only saved her from loneliness but had given her a new purpose in life. Hope Haven exists because of Gray, she explained, gesturing to the transformed property around them. He taught us that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, and that love never truly dies, it just finds new ways to grow. The celebration's highlight came when Tommy and Gray recreated their first meeting, not the traumatic rescue but their hospital reunion. Gray, now confident and gentle, demonstrated his therapy dog skills while Tommy explained how their shared experience had inspired his decision to study veterinary medicine. The once frightened boy and the formerly chained dog had both grown into sources of healing for others. Local businesses had contributed to the celebration. The pet supply store set up a donation station for Hope Haven, while the bakery provided dog-friendly treats alongside human refreshments. Children ran through the garden, supervised by therapy dogs and their handlers, their laughter mixing with happy barking. The mayor presented Margaret and Gray with a key to the city, announcing that Springfield would host an annual Animal Welfare Awareness Week in Gray's honor. The celebration had drawn visitors from neighboring states, including representatives from other rehabilitation centers hoping to learn from Hope Haven's model. As evening approached, the formal ceremony gave way to smaller gatherings throughout the garden. Gray moved among the groups, greeting old friends and offering comfort to those who needed it. He paid special attention to a recently rescued dog attending with its foster family, demonstrating the gentle leadership that had become his hallmark. The day concluded with a quiet moment as the sun set. Tommy, Margaret, Alex, and Gray sat together on the porch of Hope Haven, watching the last visitors depart. They represented different generations, different life experiences, all brought together by one dog's incredible journey from chains to freedom. You know, Tommy said softly, scratching Gray behind the ears, some people still don't believe a dog chained for 7 years could turn out like this. But Gray was always this dog, we just had to give him the chance to show us. As if understanding, Gray lifted his head and looked at each of them in turn, his eyes full of the wisdom and compassion that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. In the garden Thomas had planted, Hope had indeed grown into something beautiful and lasting. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your own experiences with animal rescue or rehabilitation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope and second chances. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these important messages about animal welfare and the power of compassion. If you believe in second chances and the importance of understanding over judgment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Together we can make a difference in the lives of animals who need our help. Your support enables us to continue documenting and sharing these powerful stories of survival, love, and redemption.